The blizzard had turned Paradise, Nevada, into a white tomb, and Victoria Bishop knew with terrible certainty that she was about to die in it. She pressed herself against the wind-scoured rocks at the edge of town, her fingers numb inside her thin gloves, watching the three men close in through the swirling snow. They moved with the casual confidence of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. The Dalton brothers had been tracking her for 2 days, ever since she'd witnessed them murder the bank clerk in Carson City and taken the evidence that could hang them all. "Come on out, Miss Bishop," called the eldest, Frank Dalton, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. "No sense freezing to death when we can make this quick." Victoria's breath came in short, painful gasps. The Derringer in her coat pocket held only 2 bullets, and there were 3 of them. The December storm of 1882 had caught everyone by surprise, transforming the high desert landscape into something unrecognizable. She'd thought the weather might save her, might cover her tracks as she fled toward Paradise. Instead, it had trapped her here in this snowdrift at the edge of town, too exposed to run, too outnumbered to fight. The middle brother, Tom, moved to her left, cutting off any escape route back toward the scattered buildings barely visible through the white curtain of snow. The youngest, Pete, circled right. They had her cornered and they knew it. "We just want the letter," Frank said, closer now. "Give us the letter and maybe we let you walk away." Victoria's hand tightened around the Derringer. They were lying. She'd seen Frank shoot that clerk point blank, watched him fall as the other 2 emptied the safe. The letter she carried, written by a dying witness to their crimes in 3 other territories, would see them all hanged. They couldn't let her live. "I don't have it," she lied, her voice steadier than she felt. Frank laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Then I guess we'll just have to search your frozen corpse." He raised his revolver, and Victoria knew her time had run out. She started to pull her own pitiful weapon, knowing it wouldn't be enough, when the thunder of hoofbeats cut through the storm. A rider exploded out of the white chaos like an avenging angel, his horse's hooves throwing up clouds of snow. The man had his guns already drawn, and they spoke with a voice that drowned out even the wind. The first shot took Frank's revolver clean out of his hand. The second whistled past Tom's ear so close he dove for cover. The third kicked up snow at Pete's feet, sending him scrambling backward. "Next man who moves gets more than a warning," the rider called out, his voice carrying an authority that froze the bandits more effectively than the cold ever could. Victoria stared at her savior as he brought his horse between her and the Dalton brothers. He sat tall in the saddle, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-20s with dark hair visible beneath his snow-dusted hat. His face was all hard angles and determined lines, and his hands held those revolvers with the easy competence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing with them. "This ain't your business, friend," Frank said, cradling his injured hand. Blood dripped onto the pristine snow. "I'm making it my business," the cowboy replied. "The lady looks like she could use some help. That lady stole something that belongs to us." "That's so." The cowboy's eyes, a startling blue even in the dim light of the storm, flicked to Victoria. "You steal something, madam?" Victoria's mind raced. She didn't know this man, had no reason to trust him, but she also had no other options. "I have evidence of their crimes. They murdered a man in Carson City. I saw it happen." The cowboy's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his gaze. "That true, boys?" "She's lying," Tom spat. "Maybe, maybe not." The cowboys' revolvers didn't waver, "but I'll tell you what's definitely true. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Time to ride on." "There's 3 of us," Pete said, finding some courage. "One of you." The cowboy smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I only need 1 second per man. You want to find out if I'm bluffing? Go ahead and draw." The seconds stretched out, tension hanging thick despite the cold. Victoria could see the calculation in Frank's eyes, weighing odds and options. Finally, he spat into the snow. "This ain't over," he said. "Not by a long shot." "It is for today," the cowboy replied. "Now move, before I decide to bring you in myself." The Dalton brothers retreated through the snow, Frank still clutching his hand, all three throwing back looks of pure hatred. The cowboy watched them until they disappeared into the storm, then finally lowered his weapons and turned to Victoria. "You hurt, madam?" Victoria shook her head, though she was shaking so hard from cold and shock she could barely stand. "No, thank you, I thought I was dead." "Not today." He dismounted in one fluid motion and was at her side immediately. "But you're half frozen." "Come on, we need to get you somewhere warm." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. His body blocked the worst of the wind, and even through her coat, she could feel the warmth radiating from him. The horse picked its way carefully through the deepening snow toward the buildings of paradise. "What's your name?" Victoria asked, her teeth chattering. "Brock Ellison," he replied. "I'm a deputy marshal out of Virginia City. Been tracking the Daltons for 2 weeks." Relief flooded through her. "A lawman, thank God. Victoria Bishop. I'm a schoolteacher from Carson City." "Well, Miss Bishop, you picked a hell of a day to be out in a blizzard." Despite everything, Victoria found herself laughing, though it came out more like a sob. "I didn't exactly plan it." Brock guided his horse to the Paradise Inn, the largest building in the small town. The settlement had sprung up around a silver mine that had played out the previous year, and now served mainly as a way station for travelers heading to or from California. In the summer, it was a dusty collection of sun-bleached buildings scattered across the high desert. In this freak winter storm, it looked like something from a different world entirely. The innkeeper, a weathered woman named Martha Hayes, took one look at Victoria and immediately went into action. Within minutes, Victoria found herself wrapped in blankets by a roaring fire in the common room, with hot coffee warming her hands and Martha fussing over her like a mother hen. Brock stood near the door, speaking in low tones with the innkeeper's husband, George. Through her exhausted haze, Victoria watched him. He'd removed his coat, revealing a lean, muscular frame clothed in worn but clean range clothes. His gun belt hung low on his hips, the revolvers that had saved her life resting easy in their holsters. There was a quiet confidence about him, a sense of competence that made her feel safe for the first time in days. When he caught her looking, he offered a small smile and came over to crouch beside her chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I might actually live," Victoria said. "Thanks to you." "Just doing my job, madam." "Your job is to ride through blizzards rescuing foolish schoolteachers." His smile widened slightly. "The rescuing foolish people part is definitely in there somewhere. The blizzard was just bad timing." Victoria felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Up close, Brock Ellison was even more striking than she'd first thought. There was a kindness in his eyes that seemed at odds with the deadly efficiency she'd witnessed, but somehow both aspects fit together perfectly. "Tell me about this letter," Brock said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "The evidence you mentioned." Victoria glanced around, but the common room was empty except for Martha in the kitchen and George tending the fire on the far side of the room. She reached into her coat and withdrew a carefully folded envelope, creased and stained from her journey. "A man named Howard Pierce wrote this before he died. He was a witness to the Daltons robbing a payroll shipment in Wyoming 6 months ago. They killed 3 guards. Pierce escaped, but he was wounded. He made it to Carson City, where I helped care for him before he passed. He told me everything, wrote it all down, and made me promise to get it to the authorities." Brock took the letter carefully, reading through it with intense concentration. Victoria watched his jaw tighten as he absorbed the contents. "This is solid evidence," he said finally. "Pierce was thorough. Names, dates, descriptions. This could put them away for good." "That's what I thought. That's why I was bringing it to the marshal in Virginia City. But they found out I had it somehow. They've been after me ever since." "How did they know?" Victoria's face fell. "I think Pierce's landlady told them. She was asking questions after he died, seemed very interested in what happened to his belongings. I didn't think anything of it at the time." Brock nodded slowly, his mind clearly working through the implications. "The Daltons have informants all over Nevada. It's how they've stayed ahead of the law this long." He looked at her directly, and Victoria felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. "You did the right thing, Miss Bishop." Running took courage. It didn't feel courageous. It felt terrifying. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite it. The simple statement, delivered with such quiet conviction, made Victoria's throat tighten with emotion. She'd been so scared, so alone for so long. Having someone acknowledge what she'd been through, validate her choices, was almost overwhelming. "What happens now?" she asked. Brock stood, tucking the letter carefully into his own coat. "Now we wait for the storm to break. Once it does, I'll escort you to Virginia City. You'll need to give testimony, and this letter needs to get into official hands. The Daltons won't give up, but with proper protection and this evidence, we can end their run for good. And if the storm doesn't break, then we wait longer. But don't worry, Miss Bishop, I'm not going anywhere." The storm raged for 2 more days. Paradise became an island of warmth in a sea of white fury, with snow drifting higher than a man's head in places. The handful of other travelers trapped in town settled into an uneasy routine, gathering in the common room for meals and warmth, then retreating to their rooms when night fell. Victoria found herself spending most of her waking hours in Brock's company. The deputy marshal took his protective duties seriously, never straying far from her side, always positioned between her and the door. But what started as simple protection evolved into something more as the hours stretched into days. They talked about everything and nothing. Victoria told him about her life as a schoolteacher, about the 20 bright-eyed children who looked to her for knowledge and guidance. She spoke of her late parents, her father a minister who'd brought his family west to bring the gospel to the frontier, her mother who died of fever when Victoria was 16. She described her dreams of opening a school of her own someday, somewhere she could make a real difference. Brock, in turn, shared pieces of himself. He'd been born in Missouri, the son of a farmer who'd lost everything in the war. At 18, he'd headed west seeking opportunity and found his calling in law enforcement. He'd worked as a town marshal, then a county sheriff, before accepting his current position as a deputy federal marshal. He spoke with passion about bringing order to the chaos of the frontier, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "It's not about the gun fights or the glory," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind howling outside. "It's about making sure a woman can walk to market without fear, or a child can play in the street without worry. That's what matters." Victoria studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Is that why you helped me? Just another person to protect?" Brock turned to meet her gaze, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "At first, maybe, but not anymore." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension that had been building since that first day in the storm. Victoria felt her heart begin to race, felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "What changed?" she asked softly. "I did. You did. Brock reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. Victoria, I've met a lot of people in this job. Good people, bad people, everything in between. But I've never met anyone quite like you. I'm just a school teacher. You're a woman who risked everything to see justice done. You're brave and smart and kind. His voice dropped lower. And you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Victoria felt heat flood her face. She'd received compliments before, awkward attempts at courtship from miners and merchants, but nothing that made her feel like this. Nothing that reached into her chest and squeezed her heart until she could barely breathe. Brock, she whispered, not quite sure what she was asking for. He seemed to understand anyway. He leaned in slowly, telegraphing his intentions, giving her every chance to stop him. When their lips finally met, it was gentle and sweet and absolutely perfect. Victoria's eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into the kiss, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm, as fast and wild as her own. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Brock rested his forehead against hers. I shouldn't have done that, he said, though he didn't sound particularly sorry. Why not? Because I'm supposed to be protecting you, because you're a witness in my case, because you deserve better than a lawman who spends his life chasing outlaws from one end of the territory to the other. Victoria pulled back enough to look him in the eye. Shouldn't I be the one to decide what I deserve? A slow smile spread across Brock's face, transforming it from handsome to absolutely devastating. I suppose you should at that. Then shut up and kiss me again. He did. Over the next day, as the storm finally began to show signs of breaking, Victoria and Brock stole moments together whenever they could. A touch of hands as they passed in the hallway. A shared smile across the dinner table. A long, heated kiss in the shadows of the stairwell that left them both trembling, but the reality of their situation hung over everything. The Daltons were still out there, still hunting. And even if they succeeded in bringing the outlaws to justice, what then? Victoria had a life in Carson City, students who depended on her. Brock's work took him all over the territory, often into danger. There was no easy path forward for whatever this thing between them was becoming. We'll figure it out, Brock said on their last night in paradise, holding her close as they sat together on the small sofa in the common room. Everyone else had gone to bed, leaving them alone with the dying fire. Somehow we'll figure it out. Victoria wanted to believe him. But she'd seen enough of the world to know that wanting something wasn't always enough. The storm broke the next morning, revealing a landscape transformed. The high desert was buried under 3 feet of snow, glittering brilliantly in the winter sun. The cold was intense but clean, the air so clear it felt like you could see forever. Brock spent the morning preparing for their journey, checking his horse and acquiring a mount for Victoria. George Hayes had a sturdy mare he was willing to sell, and Brock paid for her without hesitation, waving off Victoria's protests. Consider it an investment, he said with a wink. In justice. They set out just after midday, following the snow-packed trail north toward Virginia City. The journey would take 3 days under normal conditions, but with the snow it might take 5 or more. Brock had packed supplies for a week, just to be safe. The first day passed without incident. They made decent time despite the conditions and camped that night in a sheltered hollow, the horses picketed nearby and a small fire providing warmth against the frigid darkness. You think they're still out there? Victoria asked, huddled close to Brock under a shared blanket. The Daltons. Probably, but they'll have had to hole up during the storm too, same as us. We've got a head start and I know how to cover our tracks. We'll be fine. Victoria wanted to believe him, but as she drifted off to sleep in his arms, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. She was proven right the next afternoon. They'd been riding through a narrow canyon, the walls rising high on either side, when Brock suddenly tensed in his saddle. His hand dropped to his revolver, and he signaled Victoria to stop. "What is it?" she whispered. "We've got company. Stay behind me." The Dalton brothers emerged from behind a pile of boulders ahead, all three armed and looking considerably more prepared than they had during the storm. Frank's hand was bandaged, but he held his gun steady, aimed directly at Brock. "Told you this wasn't over," Frank called out. "Now, nice and slow, I want you to toss those guns aside." Brock's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "You know I can't do that." "Then the lady dies first and you can watch." Tom had circled around somehow, Victoria realized with horror. He was behind them, his rifle trained on her back. They'd been ambushed and there was no way out. "All right," Brock said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "All right, I'm doing it." He slowly removed his gun belt, letting it drop to the snow. "Let her go. This is between us." "See, that's where you're wrong," Frank said, moving closer. "The lady has something we want, and now we're going to take it." Pete moved toward Victoria's horse, reaching for her saddlebags. Victoria's mind raced. The letter was in Brock's coat, not her bags, but once they realized that they'd search him too, and then they'd kill them both. She caught Brock's eye, saw the calculation there, the desperate search for a way out. She made a decision. "It's not in there," she said clearly. "I have it, in my pocket." "Victoria, don't," Brock started, but she ignored him. She dismounted slowly, hands visible, and reached into her coat. Instead of the letter, her fingers closed around the derringer she'd carried since Carson City. She'd learned something in her time on the run, something about fear and courage and the will to survive. She pulled the tiny gun and fired in one smooth motion, catching Pete square in the shoulder. He went down with a cry of pain and surprise. Chaos erupted. Brock dove for his gun belt, rolling in the snow and coming up firing. Tom's rifle boomed, the bullet whipping past Brock's head close enough to feel the wind of its passage. Victoria fired her second shot at Tom, missing but making him duck behind his horse. Frank was turning his gun toward Victoria when Brock's shot took him in the leg. He dropped, cursing, his weapon spinning away into the snow. "Don't move," Brock commanded, on his feet now with both revolvers drawn. "Any of you so much as twitch, and I'll put the next one through your skull." The Dalton brothers froze. Pete was groaning on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Frank sat in the snow, blood spreading from his leg wound. Tom slowly raised his hands, the fight going out of him as he realized they were beaten. Brock moved quickly, efficiently securing all three men with rope from his saddlebags. Victoria stood watching, still holding her empty derringer, her hands shaking as the adrenaline started to fade. "Victoria." Brock was at her side, gently taking the gun from her trembling fingers. "Hey, look at me. You're all right. You did good." "I shot him," she whispered. "I actually shot him. You saved our lives, both of us." He pulled her into his arms, and Victoria buried her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, feeling his heart beating strong and steady. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." "I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm going to be sick." "That's normal, but you need to hold on just a little longer." "Can you do that?" Victoria nodded against his chest, then pulled back and straightened her spine. "Yes. What do we do now?" "Now we deliver these three to justice, along with that letter. And then we figure out what comes next." The rest of the journey to Virginia City took 4 more days, slowed by their prisoners and the necessity of treating their wounds to keep them alive for trial. Brock was professional and efficient, but Victoria could see the toll it took on him. the constant vigilance required to keep three desperate men under control while protecting her at the same time. When they finally rode into Virginia City, its streets busy with miners and merchants going about their business, Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They'd made it. They were safe. The local marshal, a gruff man named Samuel Porter, took custody of the Dalton brothers and received Howard Pierce's letter with great satisfaction. "We've been after these three for over a year," he said, shaking Brock's hand vigorously. "You've done the territory a great service." Over the next week, Victoria gave her testimony to a series of officials, reliving the murder she'd witnessed and her subsequent flight. It was exhausting and often terrifying, especially when the Daltons' lawyer tried to discredit her, but Brock was there every step of the way, a steady presence at her side. The trial was swift by frontier standards. Howard Pierce's letter, combined with Victoria's eyewitness testimony and evidence Brock had gathered linking the brothers to other crimes, was damning. All three were convicted and sentenced to hang. Victoria felt no joy in it, only a weary relief that it was finally over. "What will you do now?" Brock asked her one evening as they walked along the boardwalk. It was the first time they'd been truly alone since arriving in Virginia City, and Victoria was acutely aware that decisions could no longer be postponed. "I suppose I should return to Carson City. My students will be wondering what happened to me. And if you had a reason to stay," Victoria's heart began to race. "What kind of reason?" Brock stopped walking and turned to face her fully. The setting sun painted the buildings gold behind him, and his eyes were very blue in the fading light. "I love you, Victoria Bishop. I know it's only been 2 weeks. I know we barely know each other, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Brock, I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm asking you to build a new one, with me. I've been thinking about settling down, maybe taking a town marshal position somewhere. Somewhere that needs a good school. Somewhere we could make a home together. You'd give up being a deputy marshal for me. I'd give up anything for you, but I'm not giving up anything important. I'm choosing something better. I'm choosing a future instead of just chasing the past." Victoria launched herself into his arms, kissing him with all the love and hope and desperate longing that had been building since that first moment in the snow. Brock caught her easily, holding her tight against him as he kissed her back with equal fervor. "Yes," she gasped against his lips. "Yes, yes, yes. You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. I love you, Brock Ellison. I think I have since you came riding out of that storm." His laugh was pure joy. "Marry me. Right now, today, tomorrow, I don't care, just marry me." "Tomorrow," Victoria said, smiling so wide her face hurt. "Let's get married tomorrow." They were wed the next afternoon in a small church on the edge of Virginia City, with Marshal Porter and his wife as witnesses. Victoria wore a simple blue dress purchased from the general store, and Brock had gotten his only suit cleaned and pressed. They spoke their vows with hands clasped and eyes locked, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Brock kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Victoria felt her heart swell so large she thought it might burst from her chest. They spent their wedding night at the nicest hotel Virginia City had to offer, which wasn't much by big city standards but felt like a palace to Victoria. Brock carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the center of the room. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Victoria said, reaching up to loop her arms around his neck. "Now stop talking and kiss your wife." He did, and the kiss quickly deepened into something more heated. They made love slowly, carefully, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Brock was patient and tender, making sure Victoria felt cherished and safe even in her nervousness. When they finally came together, it felt like coming home. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Victoria traced patterns on Brock's chest and thought about how much her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She'd gone from a lonely schoolteacher to a woman with a husband and a future full of possibilities. "What are you thinking?" Brock asked, running his fingers through her unbound hair. "That I'm happy, that I never knew I could feel like this." "Like what?" "Complete. Like all the pieces finally fit together." Brock pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I know exactly what you mean." They stayed in Virginia City for another 2 weeks while Brock finalized his resignation from the Marshal Service and made inquiries about other opportunities. A letter came from a town called Silver Springs, about 100 miles west, looking for a new town marshal. The position came with a decent salary and a house, and the town council was eager to establish a school. It seemed too perfect to be true, but when they rode out to investigate, Victoria fell in love with the place immediately. Silver Springs was a thriving community built around a silver mine, with neat houses lining clean streets and a real sense of civic pride. The house that came with the marshal position was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that made Victoria's fingers itch to start cooking. The town council hired Brock on the spot, impressed by his credentials and his obvious dedication. The mayor's wife, a formidable woman named Eleanor Jackson, immediately took Victoria under her wing and began introducing her to every family with school-age children. "We've been needing a proper teacher for over a year," Eleanor said as they walked through the empty building that would become Victoria's schoolhouse. "The last one couldn't handle the isolation and left after 3 months, but you seem made of sterner stuff." Victoria laughed. "I've faced down outlaws and blizzards in the last month. I think I can handle teaching children." They settled into their new life with surprising ease. Brock took to his duties as town marshal with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, quickly earning the respect of the townspeople. Victoria threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse, scrubbing floors and organizing supplies and planning lessons for the 23 students who would be her charges. Their house became a home. Victoria planted flowers in boxes on the porch and sewed curtains for the windows. Brock built her bookshelves for the growing collection of books they accumulated. They established routines and rituals, small daily habits that bound them closer together. The physical side of their marriage grew deeper as Victoria's initial nervousness faded. She discovered that she had a passionate nature she'd never suspected, and Brock was an enthusiastic and generous lover. Their bed became a place of joy and connection, where they communicated in touches and sighs what words could never fully express. 6 months after their arrival in Silver Springs, Victoria realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before finally sharing her suspicions with Brock. His face lit up with such pure joy that Victoria burst into tears. "We're having a baby," he said wonderingly, pulling her into his arms. "We're really having a baby. Are you happy?" Victoria asked through her tears. "Happy, Victoria, I'm over the moon. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Victoria taught school up until her 7th month, when the children became more interested in her expanding belly than their lessons. Eleanor Jackson organized the other women to help prepare for the baby's arrival, showering Victoria with handmade clothes and blankets, and advice both welcome and otherwise. Brock was simultaneously terrified and thrilled by impending fatherhood. He read every book on babies he could get his hands on and drove Victoria slightly crazy with his hovering concern. But his love and excitement were so genuine that she couldn't really complain. Their son was born on a cool October evening in 1883, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire household. Brock held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, counting tiny fingers and toes with wonder. "He's perfect," Brock whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Howard after Victoria's father and Howard Pierce, the man whose courage in writing that letter had set everything in motion. Little Tommy had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the beginning it was clear he had a personality all his own. Parenthood changed them in ways both expected and surprising. The sleepless nights were exhausting, but watching Tommy discover the world made every moment worthwhile. Brock proved to be a natural father, patient and playful, able to soothe their son when Victoria was at her wits' end. Victoria returned to teaching when Tommy was 6 months old, bringing him to school with her in a basket and letting the older girls help care for him during lessons. The arrangement worked surprisingly well, and Tommy grew up surrounded by children and learning. 2 years later, Victoria became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect and handled it with more confidence. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1886, a tiny thing with blonde hair and her father's smile. They named her Emma Grace, and she completed their family in ways Victoria hadn't even realized were incomplete. Life in Silver Springs settled into a comfortable rhythm. Brock kept the peace with a firm but fair hand, building a reputation as a lawman you didn't cross but could trust absolutely. Victoria's school became the pride of the town, producing students who could read, write, and cipher as well as any in the territory. Their children grew healthy and strong. Tommy developed his father's sense of justice and his mother's love of learning. Emma was fearless and curious, always exploring, always asking questions. The house rang with laughter and the controlled chaos that came with small children. Victoria never forgot those terrifying days in the snow, cornered and certain she was about to die. But now those memories seemed to belong to a different person, someone younger and more frightened than she was now. That experience had brought Brock into her life, had set her on a path she never would have chosen but couldn't imagine leaving. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and she and Brock sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the Nevada hills, she would think about how much her life had changed. From lonely schoolteacher to wife and mother, from frightened victim to confident survivor. "What are you thinking about?" Brock would ask, pulling her close against his side. "About how lucky I am," Victoria would say. "How we almost never met, how everything could have been different. But it wasn't. We found each other. You saved my life. And you saved mine right back. We're even." But Victoria knew better. What they had was so much more than even, so much more than just two people who'd survived danger together. They'd built something real and lasting, something worth fighting for. The years passed. Tommy started helping his father around the marshal's office, learning about justice and law enforcement. Emma proved to have a gift for teaching, often helping Victoria with the younger students. The house that had once seemed plenty big enough grew tighter as the children grew, and Brock began planning an addition. When Tommy was 10 and Emma 8, Victoria realized she was pregnant again. At 32, she was older than she'd been with the other two, and she worried about complications. But Brock's steady presence and the town's support saw her through. Their second son was born in the fall of 1893, another healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs. They named him William James, after Brock's father and Victoria's grandfather, and his siblings doted on him from day one. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but Victoria wouldn't have changed a thing. She taught her students and raised her children and loved her husband with the same passion and dedication she'd always had. The years had added lines to her face and threads of silver to her hair, but they'd also added depth and richness to her life that she treasured. Brock aged well, his lean frame filling out slightly with prosperity, his hair graying at the temples. He was respected throughout the territory, often called upon to consult on difficult cases or train younger lawmen. But he never let his work take him from his family for long, always coming home to Victoria and the children. When Tommy turned 18 in 1891, he announced his intention to follow his father into law enforcement. Victoria's heart clutched with fear, remembering the dangers Brock had faced, but she also recognized the calling in her son's eyes. It was the same dedication she'd seen in Brock when they first met. "The world needs good men who'll stand up for what's right," Brock told her that night as they lay in bed. "We raised him well, he'll be fine. I know, it's just hard to let go. We're not letting go, we're letting him fly." There's a difference. Tommy did fly, becoming a deputy in a nearby town and quickly making a name for himself as fair and fearless. Emma, meanwhile, took over more of the teaching duties as Victoria began to scale back, proving herself every bit as capable as her mother. By the time William started school, Victoria was ready to step back and let Emma take over as the primary teacher. She still helped with lessons and administrative duties, but the day-to-day responsibility fell to her daughter, and Emma handled it beautifully. Victoria found herself with more time than she'd had in years. She and Brock discovered each other again, taking long walks together, traveling to San Francisco for a week-long second honeymoon that left them both feeling young and giddy. Their physical relationship, which had necessarily taken a back seat during the intense years of child-rearing, rekindled with the passion of their early days. "I love you more now than I did 20 years ago," Brock told her one evening as they watched the sunset from their porch, the same spot where they'd spent countless evenings before. "I didn't think that was possible, but it's true." Victoria leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him against her back. "I love you more too. You're my best friend, Brock, my partner, my everything. Even after all these years, all my bad habits and stubborn ways, especially after all these years." Anyone can love someone when everything's new and exciting. What we have, what we've built together through all the ordinary days and difficult moments, that's real. That's forever. Brock turned her in his arms and kissed her with the same intensity he had on their wedding day. Victoria melted into him, feeling blessed beyond measure. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and celebrations. Tommy married a sweet girl named Rebecca and gave them their first grandchild. Emma found love with a young lawyer from Virginia City and moved away, though she visited often with her own growing family. William followed his siblings into successful adulthood, becoming a teacher like his mother and grandmother. Brock retired from being town marshal at 65, handing over his badge to a young man he'd trained personally. He and Victoria spent their remaining years in comfortable companionship, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the house always full of life and laughter. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the town of Silver Springs threw them a celebration that drew people from across the territory. Former students of Victoria's, now grown with families of their own, came to pay tribute. Lawmen who'd worked with Brock shared stories of his fairness and courage. Their children stood up and spoke about what wonderful parents they'd been. Through it all, Brock held Victoria's hand, his grip as strong and sure as it had been that first day in the snow. When they finally stood to address the crowd, Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. 40 years ago, she began, her voice still clear despite her age. "I thought my life was ending. I was trapped in a blizzard, cornered by men who wanted me dead, certain I'd never see another sunrise. And then this man came riding out of the snow like something from a storybook, and he changed everything." She turned to look at Brock, seeing the same love in his eyes that had been there since the beginning. "You didn't just save my life that day. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything." Brock stood and pulled her into his arms, and the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. "You gave me everything right back," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. "You made me whole. You made me better. You made me the man I always wanted to be." They kissed, and if they were old and gray, if their bodies weren't what they used to be, none of it mattered. They had each other. They had their family. They had a lifetime of memories and love. As the celebration continued around them, Victoria rested her head on Brock's shoulder and thought back to that terrified young woman in the snow, so certain her story was ending. She wished she could tell that woman not to be afraid, that something wonderful was about to begin. That the cowboy with the guns blazing wasn't just saving her life, he was giving her a new one. But then again, maybe that young woman had known. Maybe in that moment when their eyes first met, when Brock Ellison positioned himself between her and danger, some part of her had recognized him. Had known that this man, this moment, was the beginning of everything that mattered. They lived out their days in Silver Springs, growing old together with grace and gratitude. When Brock passed peacefully in his sleep at 78, Victoria held his hand and whispered words of love that needed no response. She followed him 6 months later, dying quietly in the home they'd built together, surrounded by the family they'd created. Their children buried them side by side in the Silver Springs Cemetery, under a stone that read simply, "Brock and Victoria Ellison, together forever." And if sometimes, on cold winter nights when the snow fell soft and silent, people claimed to see two figures walking hand in hand through the streets of Silver Springs, well, that was just the wind playing tricks. But those who knew their story, who remembered the cowboy who rode out of a blizzard to save a schoolteacher and found his heart in the process, they knew better. They knew that some loves are strong enough to transcend even death, that some bonds last beyond a single lifetime. And they smiled and went about their business, secure in the knowledge that true love, once found, never really ends. It just changes form, becoming something eternal, something that lives on in the stories we tell and the lives we touch and the families we build. Victoria Bishop and Brock Ellison's story began in terror and snow and the thunder of guns. But it became something beautiful, something lasting, something that reminded everyone who heard it that even in the darkest moments, hope remains, that heroes do exist. And that love, real love, can save us in ways we never imagined possible. Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren, through the students Victoria taught and the people Brock protected, through the town they helped build and the example they set. Every marriage vow spoken in Silver Springs remembered their devotion. Every act of courage recalled Brock's bravery. Every kindness echoed Victoria's compassion. And sometimes, when the desert wind blew cold and the snow began to fall, the people of Silver Springs would look out their windows and remember. Remember the deputy marshal who became a hero. Remember the schoolteacher who became a legend. Remember the love story that began with guns blazing and ended with a happily ever after that lasted forever. Because some stories aren't just stories. Some are promises. Promises that courage will be rewarded, that love will conquer, that doing what's right matters. That even when we're cornered by the darkness, there's always hope that someone will come riding to our rescue. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, that someone will become everything we never knew we needed, everything we never dared to hope for, everything that makes life worth living. That was Victoria and Brock's gift to the world. Not just their love, but the reminder that such love is possible, that it exists, that it's worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth building a lifetime around. Their story ended as all stories must. But its echoes continue, rippling forward through time, touching lives they never knew, inspiring people they never met. Because that's what true love does. It doesn't just change two people. It changes the world around them, making it brighter, warmer, better. And that, in the end, is the greatest legacy of all.